We are live. Welcome. Welcome, Adam.
Hey, so good to see you, man. This is so exciting for me.
Me too. It's been a long time coming.
It has, I know. It's probably been like 2 months. You went on vacation, you disappeared for a while, you did the family thing, and now you're back.
Do that from time to time. Yes, sir.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you.
And in the meantime, you've been steadily continuing the work on this COVID log that we're going to dive into here shortly. So
Yeah. I have been. It's been definitely keeping me busy. It's definitely been keeping me busy. It's very exciting, and it takes a lot of time. So it's also very tedious in its own way. So yeah, definitely, that is what I've been doing. And can I ask you a question? Do I get to ask you any questions? Is this your
this is a
first?
conversation.
Yeah, cool. I wasn't sure how one way or two way it was. So is this the first live one you've done using this type of technology? So it streams on Twitter?
I went live this morning just to test it out and make sure that I was functional. But other than that, this is the first.
All right, cool. I'm so thrilled to be a part of that. And I'm going to go while we're talking. I am going to go. Oh, I haven't seen it on my thing yet. So when I see it, I'm going to tweet it out. So,
Okay.
All right, cool. So thanks again for having me here.
It's my pleasure. So look, let's maybe give the people a little bit of information, a little bit of background on what we're doing here, and then we can dive in a little bit.
All right, cool.
So from my end, I've been interested in you quite some time. It started. I think that Huntsman introduced me to your threads, and I started reading through them, and I thought, this guy's a genius. This is really
This is all true. Yeah, that's so fun.
And his puppy dogs and everything.
He's a good guy, except now he's better than me. He's better than I am at those threads. So I think now that he surpassed me, I've retired. That's it. I feel like I lost my one fight, and now I'm done with it.
The master becomes the teacher, or a student, I guess.
Yeah, of course. Why not?
So after I discovered you, I kind of hassled you a little bit, and you said for a while, I'm not really interested in doing a podcast right now. And then you decided that was going to change. Yeah. And you've been working on this COVID log, and I don't want to necessarily give the introduction to that really, because it's so much of what you've been doing and who you are that I want maybe for you just to give them an introduction to what we're going to dive into here, if you would, please.
Okay. So I don't even know where to begin. So why don't I begin kind of why I decided to start one? Okay.
Sure.
And I decided to start a log, and I was just having this conversation yesterday, in fact, with Pat. And so I decided to start a log, I guess, around middle January. And in middle January, I saw on Twitter some, a lot of those videos, those leaked videos of people in China kind of spontaneously dropping, right? They went into these spontaneous convulsions, and then they just dropped. And then the next video would show kind of like these Andromeda Strain type of suit people, gathering them up and then evacuating them. And then, some of them were just so ridiculous. One guy, he falls out, he comes out of a subway station or a metro, and then he starts trembling, and then he falls down. And I suspected it wasn't true, but I didn't know, right? I just thought it was very odd because, I'm fairly familiar with China, and I'm fairly familiar with some of its kind of what I like to call people operating system. But I'm also fairly familiar with what it calls discourse power, which is really what it conversations that allows to kind of, leave. And is just one part of discourse power. So, I thought it was odd that these were appearing on Twitter, and yet there was no attempt of Twitter to suppress them at all, or to bunk them or debunk them, or however these things go, because I felt if there was some authenticity to it, China, and I'm fairly familiar again with the workings within, they've had a lot of epidemics before. This is nothing new for them. They've had a lot of they have industrial accidents every week. So China is not known for being very truthful. In fact, truth within the Chinese Communist Party is very difficult to find, and it's always very siloed, and it's always very localized. So I thought it was very odd that we were seeing these videos that were allegedly leaked, and yet they were continuing to circulate for well over a month on Twitter. So I guess that brings us into when they started shutting down Wuhan, and they started showing the building up of these emergency hospitals, and it just reminded me a lot of the construction projects that were initiated for the Beijing Olympics, and also, in fact, for the Shanghai World's Fair, and that was used. Both of those were used as cloaks for building internment camps and doing some other projects there. And again, I'm very familiar with the frequency of industrial accidents and the frequency of natural accidents that happen within China. So these are nothing unusual. It is, however, very unusual for them not to have a very tight grasp. Remember something, within China, you're not dealing with a two-party system. You're dealing with one party. So that one party cannot lose its authority or its prestige, because then the entire political apparatus there turns around. So they have to keep a very tight control. They need to preserve rituals. They need to preserve a lot of things. So when you see that much disruption, it was very unusual. So then, I started just taking notes then, right? And I didn't expect it to kind of metastasize to America. So keep in mind, this is also at a time in December when China, I expected there to be a lot of social turmoil in China in December. And I knew that on the mainland, there was already a lot of social upheaval, which you didn't hear about. Most people were hearing about or, seeing the discord that was occurring within Hong Kong itself. And that's because in Hong Kong, there is a lot of media, there's a lot of presence, and it's very dense, right? There's a lot of density within the media there. Within the mainland, there isn't, right? There's there's no camera crews stationed out there. It's a closed loop, right? America has no soft power out there. So within the mainland, the Belt and Road has been collapsing. The projects have been collapsing. And in December, they were going through a huge cash crunch with dollar-denominated debt. And because of the collapsing yuan, I'm going to bore you with this stuff, but because you asked, I'm going to tell you, because of the collapsing yuan, which they had to bring down, it was really devastating their big export industries. So for the first time in a decade, they were now facing a lot of competition. At the same time, they had to service some dollar-denominated debts, which means they actually needed physical dollars. And at the same time, you had people in China, because the factories were already operating at 40% capacity because the Belt and Road projects were failing. They were starving out there, and so there was a lot of political machinations also. So I was just I thought that the Chinese Communist Party was going to have a very difficult time managing itself after Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong just became so visual in December and January, and they lost so much of their authority once. In any event, once their police force stormed the university there, that was kind of the end of it. And then the next thing you know, there's the virus, and we really haven't heard too much of the protests since then. Is that responsive to your question? You asked me.
Yes. Yep.
I give you a really long answer.
No, rambling is encouraged here. So let me jump in a little bit here, and I guess where I come at this now after listening to you carefully is, however this coronavirus situation has unfolded, whatever the genesis of it is, there seems to be a lot of things associated with it that have resulted in sort of a wide-scale slowdown in a lot of different sectors across the globe. And there seem to be these sort of like hot points or leverage points where the information and the narrative forces coalesced around a place like Italy early on, or etc. And so there are these places where a narrative sort of like leverage point appeared, and then from there it was springboarded out, and then people sort of took that as the reality of the situation, and then based a lot of the decisions that they made moving forward upon those narrative leverage points. And so you have been cataloging this, and you've gone back and captured what you could as soon as you started into this, and then you've been tracking a lot of the ways that the story has been changing. And I guess I'm not sure exactly how to land this other than to just kind of toss this into your lap and say, where do we start to analyze what's going on here so that we can sort of weave our own narrative leverage points here to help facilitate some understanding?
Yeah. So I would not start with coronavirus, right? If you're going to look at what's happening right now, and I think on Twitter and off Twitter, I've called it the fastest roll-up of power in history. And that's really it's a simple way to kind of capture this moment in time. And now we can look at it having occurred over the last 8 months, perhaps, but we can also look at it as having been the last maybe 10 years, but certainly the last 3 years. One of the things, and I think I remember telling this to a lot of people, again, on and off of Twitter, is people should keep a log. And I said, keep a log, because everything is happening quicker than the mind can comprehend it. I mean, our minds are not limitless. We can only hold so many thoughts in our minds at one time, and the media is certainly competing for its share of real estate in our frontal lobes. So it's almost impossible for a person to be able to push the media presence out of their minds. I mean, so I would say let's begin the story of the fastest roll-up of power in history. I would say let's start it maybe even in January of 2017, because we've had so many events. And I've charted all this, and it's really interesting because at first I didn't expect to. I didn't think it was really required to tell the background, but then I realized that because of the episodic nature, which still continues, right? It's kind of like this oscillating type of thing, that I needed to kind of go backwards, that there needed to be what I thought was just a prologue, right? Actually became kind of a really important part of the story. And, I question people a lot, and I don't want to challenge people because I don't want, it's unfair. I feel like Kasparov or Magnus. So I don't really want to challenge people with certain things, with, their familiarity with the test or the not the test. And, because it takes me so long to do all the forensics on this, and it takes me so much time to have learned all this, that I know that most people can't. So I let them talk. I let them do their thing. I don't really want to interfere there. And then I also, don't want to interfere when they tell me what the timeline of events are, what Trump could have done, what Trump couldn't have done. I'm interested in that, but I'm really not interested in whether it's right or wrong. I'm interested in how their mind retains that, right? And this is a conversation I know I'm going to be having with two people, Chuck and John, pretty soon. And we're going to be discussing how the mind stores everything these days as file cabinets. Our minds have been rewired, and we're storing everything in like postcards. And they're very quickly being written up, drawn, and then within very quickly, those postcards are getting filed away and just stuck into the back of our heads. So I ask a lot of people about what they remember from 2017, what do they remember from 2018, what do they remember from 2019, and I can tell you it's kind of stunning the things that people don't remember, or they don't remember that it was only last year. And I'm not even talking about the impeachment, because that's still, people are talking, well, Trump this or Trump that because of the impeachment. I'm, talking about, just so many things. Roger Stone being arrested in January, and, the Michael Flynn, the DOJ dropping all of that, and it's still going on. There's just Soleimani being killed, al-Baghdadi being killed, Iran shooting down their own plane. There's just so many events that have happened that people don't understand the episodic nature of it and how much it's consuming our mind. So again, you asked me a short question, but the long answer to whatever your question was, because I kind of forgot, right, is 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 our frontal lobes. We are not in possession of our own frontal lobe. So what I'm trying to do is just trying to record this moment as best as I can, right? So because I know the mind can't comprehend it, I'm kind of trying to remove my mind as much as I can from this and just think of myself as being kind of an observer. And I don't allow myself to get emotionally engaged in any of this. I don't pay attention to the election. I don't pay attention to this or to that. I know that there's some riots going on, so I'll see a little bit of that and I'll be like, all right. And rather than kind of allowing myself to form an opinion on that, I think to myself, where does that fit in within this roll-up of power? How much media time is this consuming? There's just a lot of things. So whatever your question was, that must have answered something.
If nothing else, it leads me to another question, which is, I'm not sort of naive to the reality that memories are flawed and malleable, and that humans are susceptible to information overload in a lot of different ways. And my question to you is this: to what degree do you suppose that this quote unquote fastest roll up of power in human history has something to do with this fastest rollout of narrative information in history, this sort of scaling up of just a flood of information and usually emotionally charged information? There's very little sort of objective reporting where somebody will say, these are the facts, and that's all I have to say about it. It's always tied to some other agenda, some other political agenda or some other social agenda. And so I guess I wonder to what degree you suppose these two things are correlated or connected.
I don't try and correspond any of that, right? So I am not an authority by any means on behavioral sciences or memetics, this. And I've actually tapped two people who are kind of experts because I'm really curious, because I've observed this. And so I'll tell you how I've observed people's rewiring. And this, again, doesn't answer your question, but it answers something. So I'll just throw it out there. That, when I started trying to describe what my project was, right? I would say this is the fastest roll of power. And I've been saying it the last few months. People didn't really get it. I'd be talking about elites. People would be like, whatever is that? And then I would be trying to abbreviate things as much as I could. And it's an effect that I learned. And then Chuck, who's become a friend of mine and he's an academic on Twitter, and then John Robb, who have studied this really, whereas Chuck has studied it within a more academic environment, and it's really been a huge part of his life. And then John Robb, who has been observing this over the last few years from his own military familiarity with military behavioral sciences and tactics within guerrilla warfare and the way memetics work. So, again, I used to try and describe it to people, and I would talk about, I hate to call things fake news, but inconsistencies and just kind of the episodic nature. And I found that it was very difficult for people to grasp what I was saying. And they wanted everything put on, basically compressed down to maybe 10 words. That's all their minds could really fathom of holding on to a concept, this intangible type of thing, was, just for the fewest amount of words possible. So initially I described it as, if somebody asked me what France is like, and what they really want is just a postcard of the Eiffel Tower with no background, just a postcard of the Eiffel Tower. And from that, their minds can kind of complete the picture, because that's really what happens. It doesn't make a difference if their minds, I'll give them a picture of the Eiffel Tower, and their minds will do all the rest of the work. All I have to do is give them a picture of the Eiffel Tower. There's something wrong with the way people's minds been wired, that they can't take the complete information and file it away properly. They have to turn something into what I really call a postcard. So it's become so difficult for me to explain to people what's going on that I kind of gave up. And instead, I'm just recording everything and, just writing everything down. And it's probably about 50 different categories right now. So it's not just about COVID. It's not just about the HCQ debates and about doctors. In fact, I would say a lot of it is no longer about COVID. COVID is just is one big part of it, right? Because COVID is this effect that I described as dark city, right? When you're locked in, you'll forget what it was like before, which is one of the big problems within our democratic system, a Western system for the last several hundred years. Is we all have a good sense of freedom, and particularly within America. So you've got to you in order to corrupt that and to take that away, you've got to lock people up. You've got to make them forget what freedom once was. These are not old concepts. I mean, this goes back thousands of years. Nothing what I'm saying is new. It's just the way that they've implemented it, the forcefulness, the violence in which they've implemented it, and they've put all these measures out there is just shocking. So, we see the riots. I've called these rioters kind of a phalanx for the megacorps, because clearly the megacorps are a part of what's going on. Clearly, they're very happy with displacing political structures with their own, let's call it corporate structures. So I'm trying to record that as much as possible, and I'll give you an instance of that. Right? Is we saw Antifa at DC, right, in Georgetown. I guess they were there like a week ago or something. And it's just very interesting because we're seeing the DC elites now being displaced by the Amazon elites. We're seeing them being displaced by the Facebook, Amazon corporate elites who are pushing them out. And they've been able, yeah. So we'll discuss, but that's part of it. Also, is how violently and how quickly and coercively we've seen kind of change in structural changes within both what we would call our democracy, our republic, into something that it's transformed into something that's not that. Right? The words we have to describe our political structures no longer work. We can't say that a congressperson is available to people anymore. They're not. We can't say a senator is, right? Because they're not. You can't call up your senator and say, let's have a cup of coffee. I want to discuss this with you, right? But if you have a complaint, and you can't say I've got a complaint about my water bill, I want to call up my senator or my congressperson and hash this out with them. They'll be unresponsive to you, most likely, right? But you can do that with Google. With Google, your user experience is very good, right? They're quick, they're responsive. If the customer service is really good, so Google and Amazon are have much more frequency touching you than your politicians do, right? You're interacting more frequently with the megacorps now, and they're much more responsive to their electorate, so to speak, than the politicians are. So also within this fastest roll-up of power, we're seeing this transformation of a political system into something different. And I'm also trying to record that. So there's a lot of things I'm trying. There's like 40, I'm going to say there's probably like 50 chapters that were segments. Right now they're just segments that I'm really, really diligently and very meticulously kind of cataloging and then writing little narratives and contributing to them as they grow or as they kind of get a little bit easier to kind of flesh out, and they crystallize a little bit more. So it's really, Black Lives Matter is certainly a part of that. The protests were certainly a part of that. Watching the way New York acted as an accelerant for COVID, for coronavirus in January, February, March is certainly a part of that. The same is true with Germany, looking at key events, but then looking at constitutional changes outside of the United States and in Europe, at emergency powers that have been invoked, financial reconfigurations, which have been incredible, and people aren't going to like what happens as far as that goes. So kind of interesting stuff. So whatever questions, I hope that answers something.
It answers a lot of stuff, and just like every previous time you sort of left off, it leaves me with a lot more questions than when I started. Cool. So let me just take a step back here, and what I'm hearing from you is this. there seems to be, okay, well, I guess what I'm curious about is this. There seems to be sort of you mentioned the people operating system earlier.
Yes.
And we've had all these events that have, like you said, been episodic in nature.
Yeah.
And there seems to be a shift of emphasis from one thing to the next, and it's fed to whatever through the mediums that information is fed through, or stories are fed through. We have these episodes, and you mentioned the corporations sort of superseding the political end of things, and I guess what I'm curious about is,
well, they're taking over. They're not superseding. They're taking over. I mean, this is the political structure that you grew up with and that you've most likely instructed your children about is not going to be the system that they're growing into. So
sure.
It's very important when I'm writing all of this that I'm not trying to be particularly nostalgic, right? I'm not writing this with my tears dropping onto paper or my tears dropping onto my keyboard and messing up my computers. I'm just trying, to observe it, that we really are seeing this kind of a transformation where, and I've described it before as from a territorial sovereignty to a functional sovereignty, from from the Constitution to a terms of service, and just a whole bunch of different ways I could describe it for you. But it really is something that you'll feel one day once they let you out, because right now people are still effectively locked in their homes. I mean, you may not realize it because you're a lot freer than you were 2 months ago, but effectively we're still only seeing the world kind of very small glimpses of it, and only really anecdotally, right? So and this is the reason I asked everybody to keep a notebook, so that you can kind of observe the differences that have happened. And you're going to have forgotten about the way political representation used to be. And as we've certainly seen from, all the protests that have gone on and all the social movements that have been driven by these mega corporations. And we're no longer looking at this just a very large, intricate kind of interweaving of megacorps. There's not that many corporations really that are left. There's just really not. ESPN is Disney and NBA. I mean, it's very odd if you really try and I play chess and I play Scrabble. I play a lot of Scrabble. I was just playing with Nancy, and one of the interesting things is after a game is over, you do what's called a postmortem on the game, right? Which is, you say, if I had done this, then if I had considered this strategy, if I had considered doing this, then it might have led to this outcome. There's only 100 tiles in the bag, so you can do some calculations on statistical probabilities of drawing this tile and drawing that tile and creating volatility. But what you're really doing is you're analyzing you're playing a game. We use a clock. You're playing a game over the course of, let's say, 40 minutes. Okay. And when that game is over, you can now kind of analyze everything that happened within it. You can do all the forensics for every single move that was made. And you can say, was this move optimal? Wasn't this move optimal? It's a postmortem. You're looking at, so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to look at what's happening now as a living organism, right? So I'm not trying to just look at coronavirus existing in a vacuum by itself, just kind of off in a corner, because that's not what's occurring. This is all part of something else. It's all this living organism that I'm trying to best describe. So I can't just, if I were to try and describe somebody's appearance, I can say, well, they look like this and this and this. And those are very superficial things, right? And that's basically the postcard that I described to you. People are just going to file it away. They're going to make up whatever narrative they need to decide. They're going to make up the narrative so they can best file it away in their brains into their file cabinet and then forget about it. I need to actually, what did Leonardo used to do? I think Michelangelo also, where they used to, go examine the bodies and the musculature and, remove the skin, and so they can, best do their artwork. And I'm trying to do the same thing. So I'm looking at a complete system. The complete system did not begin with COVID. The complete system really, I first actually became kind of suspicious of what was going on with the strength of what we call the resistance movement, because these were not substantive type of issues, but they were very distracting type of issues. And what was interesting to me was how much people's emotional energy was being invested in uh, in these things. Right? They were protesting every single day. One day it was the Me Too and the women wearing the hats, and they were kind of celebrating something. There was a lot of selfies, but they were really emotionally investing themselves, and they were depleting themselves emotionally. So it's kind of like in Game of Death, right? When Bruce Lee is going up each flight of stairs, and the person on the first flight, I think it was uh, I forget who it was, right? It was one of his students. I forget which one it was. The person on the first flight tires him out, right? And then, but Bruce Lee kills him. Then he goes up to the second floor, and I think it's that guy with the nunchucks or whatever it is. And that guy tires him out. Then he goes up to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and then he kills him. It was a sad scene, right? Because he didn't want to kill him. And actually, he was supposed to go up one more flight, but then he died. There was actually supposed to be a higher flight. But so it just seemed to me that what these megacorps were doing is they were doing that same exhausting people's emotional capacity in that same way. Because if you're exhausting your emotional reservoir on wearing pink hats and posting pictures of your screaming kids and all this type of stuff, then you don't have the energy to fight real battles. You can't do it. You can't do both at the same time. They don't coexist. I've invested all my emotional energy into this. And I used to ask people initially, how do we get out of these wars? And they were very unconcerned. They were like, well, first we have to do this. First we have to do this. First we have to go see Wakanda, and I have to celebrate this and do this and do this. And they were exhausting themselves. And everything that was substantive got pushed out. Everything that would really affect change got pushed out. This was not accidental. And so for the last 3 years, we've seen these episodic bursts that have just wiped people's emotional capacity out. So that's also what I've been trying to record. So COVID, our people, is a population that is just emotionally exhausted. They can't make sense of what's going on. Everybody thinks that they've become a doctor. People are being given very imperfect information deliberately. And we have all of our agencies that appear to be not, I would never say they're telling untruths, because I actually don't think that they are, but I think that they're sowing confusion. So, again, whatever your question was, hey, Bill Paul, so good to see you. Thank you very much for joining. And he says terms of service equals problems. This is true. This is true. We're seeing a real transformation. And again, I'm just trying to record it. So I try and think of myself as Thucydides, right? I try and think of myself as a historian. And I also, because it's my story, it's my history that I get to write, I'm also casting myself. Not only am I Thucydides, but I'm also Alcibiades. I'm also kind of the person who's going from camp to camp and snitching on each side and just kind of informing and getting a glimpse of each side and trying to and putting that to my paper also. So I see Bill saying, so thank you. I take that as a good thing. These are things we should definitely consider because the world is changing. And I'm not nostalgic. I'm not as much concerned. I don't think the future is Mad Max. And if it is, I feel ready. I'm ready to go, man. I'm in good shape. But I don't think that's what the future is. But I think the future is substantively different. And people who aren't willing to let go and are still kind of holding on to these vestigial organs are going to have a very difficult time. So one of the reasons I've emotionally disengaged myself from everything that's going on around me is I want to relieve myself of that burden so that I am not affected by it. I try and think of myself as a disembodied intellect, just recording all of this. And again, it's like 50 different segments. So I'm recording not just COVID, not just the protest. I think I'll read you right now. I'll give you a sense of how many different segments I'm trying to capture. So these are in alphabetical order. Within it, I've got the Amazon share price, because these things are not disconnected, right? These are not decoupled things. Amazon share price since COVID has begun has gone up well over $1,000. And Amazon, if memory serves me correct, which it usually does, was around $600 when Trump came into office. Then I'm observing other things, such as within the timelines that you see everywhere now. China has been completely redacted from them. Every timeline that people see right now begins it'll begin saying China informed the World Health Organization, and that's about it. They'll have a very abbreviated history of everything before January 31st, and then they'll misreport what happened on December 31st. They'll misreport what happened on December 31st, and they'll actually misreport it. They're using very language that I've had to do forensics on. Well, they'll say China reported it, but it really wasn't the Chinese Communist Party. It was a particular agency that I don't want to bore you with. But then I go on to Boris Johnson, Boston Globe stories. It took me a lot of effort to figure out that who owns the Boston Globe, who owns Stat. Stat was doing a lot of very interesting articles that were wrong and very determined. They were very determined to kind of agitate in their own way. And then it turns out that the person who owns Stat is the same person who owns the Boston Globe. I thought that was very interesting. Then I go on, and I could just continue going on here. I talk about the propaganda that has gone on, our loss of civil rights, and again, this is in alphabetical order. So let me see where else. I'm kind of curious. Something I call fear porn. I talk a lot about. I've recorded a lot about Neil Ferguson with Imperial College and the history of it. Things such as Flatten the Curve, which I was very skeptical of at the time. I've even looked at Google Trends on all of these episodes that have occurred over the last few years, so you can see kind of how it's a pulse. It's like a living pulse where you'll have Stormy Daniels for 2 months, top of the news, and then she'll fall off, and then another story will come right after it. And if you take a look at what happened in 2019, the stories were coming much closer together. So the mind was never getting the opportunity to restore equilibrium. They're clearly keeping people's minds in chaos. And it doesn't make a difference whether it's, they're telling you news. It doesn't make a difference whether it's true anymore. All that it needs to do is to fill up your frontal lobe. So it's very interesting stuff. So I'm trying to observe that also in certain different trends. There's a lot of really interesting things. And then something I call oligarch takeover, which is how much the oligarchs are actually bailing out state agencies. For example, in New York, Michael Bloomberg and Bill Gates have pledged tens of billions of dollars. And it's just kind of interesting. So I've documented that, and I've documented pharma, which is an industry I'm very familiar with, having started up 2 very big companies within that were part of that in PEO. So I really understand kind of the lobbying part of it and how money is spent and how the lobbyists come into play. So in any event, somebody's saying you and George Carlin. So I guess that's true. Yeah, George Carlin was a smart guy. So I apologize. I've taken up so much of your time in answering what I'm not sure was your question.
Well, this is about you, really. This is your podcast. I'm just a facilitator, but I do have a question.
Okay.
How much of what you've just been describing, this organism that you've been sort of tracking the movements of and cataloging and trying to understand the genome of, how many of these actions are coordinated or intentional versus opportunistic and emergent? I guess I'm just wondering what your take on the balance between those sort of 2 different realms is.
Well, so I'm not really trying to assist any conspiracy theories, right? I'm really not trying to. I'm trying to do exactly the opposite, because I'm trying to make my histories unimpeachable, and I'm trying to make them pristine. So I'm really not looking at, I'm not really trying to stitch together a narrative that that has illusions of evil powers at work. Rather, I'm just trying to document how all these things are coming together. I mean, I can give you my own theories as to it, but I don't think they would be really helpful.
Okay, well, let me redirect then.
Yeah,
that's okay, because my curiosity on this matter is multifaceted, but it's academic in a certain sense too. I'm just watching how it happens because I recognize that I is chance. I'm not gonna change the Globo Corps. I'm not gonna change the way that the billions of dollars are funneled here and there. I just am observing and interested, and sometimes I don't necessarily care for the way things are going, but all I can do is pay attention. And so maybe as another way to approach this, I wonder, okay, you're describing this sort of emergent way that we're looking at the world now. This new people operating system is evolving right before our very eyes, and you're cataloging that evolution. So,
well, it's not happening right before our very eyes because you're locked in and I'm locked in. I mean, I can travel. Fortunately, I can travel, but and I might have certain luxuries that other people don't have that permit me to travel a little bit. But you can't observe any of this. You're locked up. How can you observe any of this? You can only see your entire world has been narrowed. Your frame has now been narrowed. Your lens is whatever lens has been bestowed upon you. It's not your own anymore.
That's kind of what I'm getting at here is here we are being told what reality is, and we can only really measure against how we feel about it, or we have, like you said, we have a limited frame. We have a sort of a very focused lens on what's going on, and we don't.
It's a tiny little aperture we've been given.
Yes, and so I guess I just wonder, as you're cataloging this and as you're putting together this log, it's going to evolve into something more. We've talked a little bit about this, and I guess I just wonder, what is your long-term goal with this? I mean, what do you hope comes from the fact that you're actually cataloging these events and recording this history and watching how these things unfold? What is the deal?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think about it a lot because anything that requires so much obsession, right? Sometimes you have to ask yourself, why am I so obsessed, and do I want to continue with this obsession? So that is something I do ask myself on occasion, but I'm just so intellectually kind of like fascinated by the whole thing that I kind of like. It's kind of like I feel like I'm window shopping. Like I'm walking down Fifth Avenue and I'm just window shopping as a little kid, looking at all the stores and thinking about what I want to buy or what I don't want to buy and imagining them on me or not. So so right now what I really want to do is just kind of walk down the avenues and see the stores. And then I also want to see how the store displays are changing, right? So, I see one outfit in the store, and then the next day there's a different outfit in the store, and I'm trying to document that and kind of take a look at what's occurring. What I want to do is, once this is complete, I don't want to. I have no desire to release any part of this. I've only shown it to 3 people, which is kind of cool. I have no desire to share any part of it right now that much. And I've shown it to 3 people just to remind me how awesome it is, because it's really, really good. I like it when they're like, wow. I kind of like that feeling. So people's minds right now are not their own. So there's no way that I can do anything that's going to be able to better inform or uninform people. No matter what I do, if I could argue timelines, I can argue inconsistencies, I can argue about China and the World Health Organization and their failings with certain articles and in the international health regulations and how they weren't enforced. I'm kind of an expert on all this stuff, but I'm competing for people's frontal lobes, and I have no way to pry my way in, right? Because the media is just constantly bombarding. This is no longer 2016 or 2014 or 2010. You have no place to escape anymore. We only have two places to escape right now, and that's into our own minds and our own bodies. That's all we have. And I know you've got your new house. So I'll say three things, right? And you have a new kid too, right? Has almost.
My youngest is 3, so fairly new, but
do you have another one on the way?
no.
Okay, think about
Not
it.
that I know of.
All right, think about it. Think about it. So
I do make great kids though, so
yeah. So there's nothing that would be helpful that I can do in 2020, and I'm not even sure in 2021. But I know that there is going to be a time. So people's minds right now, behavioral scientists say that a mind can only hold about 6 thoughts in its frontal lobe at a time. So you're only going to be able to have actively circulating. There are only a couple of thoughts. You might think of it as something that's more robust. It's not. I mean, there's a lot of things circulating in the back. There's a lot of time travel going on in your mind. But other than that, in your front, there's only a couple of thoughts. And the media is making sure that they have authority over those thoughts that are in your frontal lobe. And they're not giving you the opportunity to restore your own mind to equilibrium, right? This is a very deliberate thing. So no matter what I do right now, there is no magic pill that's going to be able to resolve that. The only thing people can do to at least repair some of the damage is just turn off everything, turn off the news, turn off media, and just spend 2 weeks with your kids and let your brain will naturally restore itself to an equilibrium. That's the only way to do it. And they've even tried to take that away from you because you're going to be sitting next to a couple at the beach and they're going to be talking about all this crap, right? Or they're going to be wearing a mask. So there's really no way you can kind of escape even the iconography of everything that's going on. That's a very deliberate thing. You're not being permitted an escape. So there's nothing that I can do that's going to be this magic potion, this remedy, my own type of HCQ that can be taken in small doses and can clear up the gray matter in a person's brain. Can't be done. But I think that there will be a time in the future when people do want to look back, right? When people are going to see right now, everything that I've read that people are writing is woefully inadequate. They're writing something in their own way that's kind of opportunistic, or they're writing something in their own way with a very narrow focus. And it's really kind of woeful. They have no system view whatsoever. I mean, everything that I've read from journalists and from this person and that person, I read all of it. I read Alex Berenson, I read all these things, and they're very good at expressing themselves and talking about inconsistencies and this and that, drawing up stats that they really don't understand that well, but they're very good at drawing up studies, even though a lot of times the studies don't say what they think they're saying, because there's different type of studies. And Trump made the same mistake. So I don't want to only, I don't want to only say it to them. There's been a whole political apparatus that's failed us. So, but I've read all the journalists, and they have no system view. They have none. They think they do, right? But this is also a behavioral sciences problem, because the world has lost a lot of its system view. While as when I've worked in a corporation, I was very lucky that I could go into each of the departments and see how the way a big complex company, which is an organism, when you're in a big company, you think about it as a living thing. It really is. There's a lot of intricacy in its operations. There's a lot of levers. You're thinking about profitability and moving this to that, and you've got all your ancillary products, and it's really interesting. So the journalists don't have that. And that was also what compelled me to write something, because they're just focused on what I would think of within my own thing as one little chapter, right? HCQ or this, or, Sweden shutting down. That's not particularly interesting to me. I'm trying to write a history. This is my Peloponnesian War, right? So I'm writing of Sparta and I'm writing of Athens. There's a lot of interesting characters in there, and there's a lot of interesting things. But what I'm really trying to write is not just about the Peloponnesian War. I'm trying to write about the period between Alexander the Great and the Roman Empire, okay, with a capital E. So that was really only about 200 years in between, and in some places there was only maybe 50 or 60 years in between them. So when Alexander the Great died and his empire was split up, very soon thereafter we had the real rise of the Roman Empire, right? That was not accidental. Just as the collapse of Rome brought about the rise of northern and France and some of the other countries up there, and Charlemagne and everything else. So I'm trying to, when I say the fastest roll up of power, I'm looking at that period from Alexander the Great, and then it breaks up into 5 different empires and a Seleucid and all that. From Alexander the Great to Augustus, who's one of my favorite figures in history. So I'm really looking at Alexander the Great to Augustus. And that's what I'm trying to document. But instead of that took 200 years, here it's happened in 5 years. It's happened in 4 years. So that's really what I'm trying, to look at. And coronavirus is just one small part of that. And if I spend too much time on coronavirus by itself, I'm not going to see how the protests are a part of that. The protests have acted as kind of this form of cryptic transmission. There's a lot of things going on. So they're all connected. It's a living organism, and the pain that I feel in my arm here could be caused from the toe that I stubbed on the opposing side last week. So I'm trying to look at all those things and put them all together.
So if people were listening very carefully, a lot of people just got the shit scared out of them. And
Why?
I guess, well, because the period between Alexander the Great and Augustus is full of some intense activity. And I guess what I'm curious about here is you often say that you're long on America.
Yeah, I'm really bullish on America. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Best country in the world.
Okay, but our whole operating system is changing, and everything about the way that we do business and do politics is changing. So what does that even mean moving forward? Because uncertainty is scary to people, and we're facing a bunch of that right now. And I guess I wonder what even is America mean to a guy like you who's cataloging this transition into something new?
Can we agree? So right now we're taking a look. I've said that the megacorps are taking over, and I'm just going to give you that postcard. Okay, that's just the postcard I'm giving you. If we know the megacorps, if you can oblige me with at least that temporary acceptance that the megacorps are taking over, and that we're seeing the cartelization of the United States, right? Then we buy the cartels, right? Which is what I've been trying to tell people on and off Twitter. We buy the cartels. Look at Amazon, look at Tesla, look at all the things that are happening. Even look at Boeing from 100 to 180. But you buy the cartels. We know the world is being cartelized. And what you're looking at is you're trying again, your aperture is needs to be widened, because you're saying, well, America is changing and the rest of the world is static. And it's not. The rest of the world is changing just as violently as what's occurring within the United States. It's actually much worse in China. You just don't hear about it because they have a lot of propaganda. They are killing themselves in China. And I speak of the regime. The Chinese Communist Party regime is completely collapsing. Belt and Road is collapsing. There's people who are starving. The Rust Belt is collapsing. Their factories are operating well below capacity. This has been a PR disaster for them. Their Exim Bank loans are collapsing. The elites never wanted Z and the Exim Bank to be as aggressive as they were. And now they've got countries like Djibouti and countries like Sri Lanka, countries like Tajikistan that are in Montenegro, and I could just go on, that are in an enormous debts to them, that can't service their loans, and that are not going to fulfill the terms of the contracts, and these are opaque contracts for the Belt and Road, they're not going to fulfill whatever the terms were and surrender ports and other public assets. So we just saw Sri Lanka give up a 99-year port. Every country in the world, well, maybe not in America, but every other country saw what Sri Lanka did and said, we're not going to let this happen to us. So there has been a real collapse. The social credit system was coerced into the population within China. The four consciousnesses of Z was also forced into them. This is causing a lot of their own decay, and you were already looking at a very unstable system there. And unlike in the United States, where our system has been deliberately very tolerant and very durable, there, when things collapse, they really collapse. It's like the Three Gorges Dam. When things go bad, they go really, really bad. So when you say, how can I still be bullish on America? Well, we also have to look at the rest of the world. The rest of the world is not static. I mean, Europe is done. Europe is not sure if they're going to survive into the next decade. I mean, it's really, really bad what's occurring there. They've got some significant issues that they need to work through, and it's what I've discussed with supply chains and kind of this bifurcation of the world that's happening as the world split up between the United States and China. So things are definitely changing, but I don't necessarily think they're only changing for the worse. I think the opportunities are going to change. I think the startup environment is really, really good. Space Force is going to create millions of new jobs. I think the developing countries are going to show us a lot of growth. That we're going to see a lot of downstream innovation, very high yield innovation there. I mean, somebody says they have a question. So
yeah. I just want to clarify just a second, then we can get to some questions. I'd love to do some questions here, but I wasn't necessarily saying that the rest of the world is static. If we're evolving, I guess I was just sort of questioning.
I didn't say evolving. I'm not.
You don't think so?
I think that people are, and this is a conversation I'm really excited to have with Chuck and John. I think people's brains are being rewired. I think behavioral sciences have changed everybody substantively as they've really been honed over the last 15, 20 years. Behavioral sciences are actually new. So when you think of propaganda, when you think of behavioral sciences, most people are still thinking of kind of Noam Chomsky type of stuff, manufacturing consent. And I know I've described it as this before, but I really want you to, really internalize it. That was very Paleolithic. That was the Paleolithic period of the behavioral sciences. We're in the Mesolithic. We're right in the middle of that. We're still in kind of the Bronze Age of the behavioral sciences. And I don't know what the next period is really going to look like. I don't think it's going to be particularly bad or good. It's just going to look much different. So, I'm not bearish on America. I think we're, of all the countries that are going through this, I think we're the ones that are the most durable. Okay. I truly do.
Well, let's start getting to some questions here. I see one here from Romani Srikanth that says, "How can we restore system thinking?"
That's a really interesting thing, and I've noticed this for several years. I had the benefit, and I've been very blessed. So, knock on my wife's desk, which is like a mirror. I think it's Nancy. This is a mirror. Right? It's a knock on. I wish there was wood, but then I'd have to get up and knock on my walls or something.
Don't knock it too hard and break that.
Yeah. So just knock on her mirror desk. I was fortunate that I left school young. I knew I wanted to go to Wall Street. And I think one of the greatest things that happened to me from that is they never completed my indoctrination. That's really the way I thought about it at the time. It's the way I think about it now. It's why I think kids are crazy for going to school, the way they're being coerced into school. I think they should get a job first and then backfill for the education. They're being robbed. So I think that we've created so much specializations, right? Just so much specialization that we've completely lost people's abilities to kind of comprehend things in a system view. And so this is true. And I've had these conversations for many, many years with doctors, from their own experience, because they're my age. I'm 54, and I'll ask them about what they're observing in the younger students that are coming in and the interns. This is also very true. It's also very true in legal, as everything's become so specialized, and they become really, really, really smart in a very horizontal way, right? So it's not that their intelligence is this way. Their intelligence is this way. Well, let me go like this so you can see it on the thing. Their intelligence is not this way, right? Their intelligence is this way. Does that make sense to you? It's like horizontal thinking. So, but they're really good horizontal thinkers. So I don't know how to restore a system view or why we've lost it so much. I'm very interested in it. I'm interested in it because, as I've described, when I try and talk to people about this, the fastest roll-up of power in history, I might even, right now I'm coming across a bit impassioned, and usually I don't. Usually I'm more serene. But I have found that people's views of things are so shallow, they can only kind of digest a couple of paragraphs from a BuzzFeed article, and from that they can glean an entire from just reading a few paragraphs of a BuzzFeed article, because I've gone through this with people. They'll make up the rest. So if a story is 1,000 words, all they feel that they need to do is to read one paragraph, and they figured out the whole thing, and they can make up the rest of the story in their mind. That probably doesn't make sense to you, but because I've examined people with this, I can tell you it is true. So how do we resolve that? I don't know. Is it that there's too much information? I don't know. Is it that we're not properly training our students and our youth? I don't know. Is it because they're not reading any good books and they're reading kind of crap books these days? And I don't know. So I guess one of my wife's favorite authors is Nabokov, right, Nance?
My very favorite author.
Her very favorite author is Nabokov, and our son is who? Dostoevsky, right? Yeah. And so we go to Amazon bookstore, and because Barnes and Noble's got closed here, the one that was very convenient for us. And so the way they display books in Barnes and Nobles, they have a different system, right? Their system is they display books by how they've been rated by user reviews. Does that make sense to you? By reader reviews. So Nancy's favorite, one of her favorite books was Lolita. She likes Murakami, so Murakami. These got 4.3. Their rating on it was a 4.3. So it was not in eye level. It was like 3 shelves down and to the back. Okay. And Murakami, the same thing. Our sons, what is it, like Notes from the Underground or The Brothers? Or
The Brothers come around.
Yeah. So that was also rated a 4.3. And the reviews for it, they would also show the blurbs of the reviews. And the reviews for the reader reviews, the Amazon reader reviews for Nabokov was something like he's a perverted person, but some of the sentences are really interesting. It's freaking crazy. It was crazy. And they're like, but I'm giving it a 4.3. And that's how they place the book. Yet Ta-Nehisi Coates and on one side, on the liberal side, I guess he's a liberal, and then they had a conservative side. It was really weird the way they do these things. And I guess it was I don't know a lot of these popular people. Ben Shapiro, okay? So Ta-Nehisi Coates got a 4.8. A 4.8. The reader reviews were a 4.8. The reader reviews for like the Ben Shapiro book or whatever book it was on the conservative side was like a 4.6. So what does that mean? When you were a kid, well, you're still a kid, but I'm 54, right? So when I was a kid and I would walk through a bookstore, I would pick up the classics. I didn't know they were the classics, but they were the ones that were available to me. They piqued my interest. I would walk through the library. It's how I discovered the Diary of Anne Frank. I was in my school library. I picked it off the shelf, started reading it, probably finished it the next day. I had a crush on her as a little 11-year-old. But these kids are not reading that. Instead, when they walk around the bookstore, they're not being exposed to the classics. They're being exposed to Ta-Nehisi Coates and this kind of and I'm sure his first book is supposed to be very interesting. But I looked through his latest book, and it was crap. It was just absolutely grammatically crap. And Ben Shapiro is crap. I mean, come on, really? These are all memes on both sides. Very incomplete, just memes without even the pleasure of a picture. So I don't know how to restore people's system view, but I think it's really important.
So Ramsey4 here has a question. He asks, do you see industrial metal sector as a good place to invest? Inputs to defense and electrification as an example of why he thinks they might be.
I'd rather discuss that on some of the investor ones that I've done because I
Sure,
think
no problem.
I think they're really, really cool. And because you're going to have follow-up questions and I want to be really responsive to them, I think it's very important right now that people consider kind of generational wealth because we are going to see different tax structures come in. So part of this kind of transformation that we're experiencing and that I call this dark city, right? So when they finally open the doors a little bit and you're allowed to really walk around more freely, you're no longer going to be that person you were, okay? The tax structures are all going to be changed also. And so once they start releasing you and locking you up and then releasing you, they're also going to be implementing new tax structures, and the sovereignties of the states are going to have VAT taxes and GST taxes. So it means that people have to consider how to protect their money a lot better, right? So that's why I think the investor series is really important because they're cruel. These people are cruel, and they want their money, and it's our obligations to not give it to them, right? Or give them the bare minimum. Yeah.
So Ramsey4 had a question very early. It was the first question, and he asked, "Do you have any tips for how to keep the best possible daily log?"
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So Jim O'Shaughnessy and I have discussed this a lot, right? And we should probably going to invite myself onto his podcast to do a third because I just broke the record. I'm the first person who's ever been on this thing twice.
I love that guy.
So somebody asked, I saw somebody here asked, they said, like, I've got a question for you. What's an extreme salesperson? Dude, come on. That's an extreme salesperson. I got on this thing twice, and now I'm going for 3. So before I can really be responsive to your question, read 2 books, right? Read On the Shortness of Life and read Letters to Lucilius, right? And then I'll follow up and we'll do another podcast and we'll just talk about those 2 books, maybe even Epictetus. But then you'll have a much more of appreciation of why you have to keep a log. So forget about my log right now. You have to have an appreciation for why you need to keep a log. So you really got to begin there. And I don't know if that was responsive, but it's the best I can do. I think I can come back and discuss that.
So Generator 16 has been quite active in the comments here, and
the
question that he has is why are we still using Link 16?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I suppose they know I'm involved in some things in India and some other type of encryption type of stuff, so I'm not going to answer that. But I think friend or foe systems and link systems are. I think a lot of things are going to be changing. I'd rather just leave it at that. And you got to take a look at the way the defense industry is changing, and communications, and you're going to see a lot of quantum teleportation. I think a lot of things are changing because America is no longer the sole hardware manufacturer anymore. And that's just the reality. So America isn't necessarily only going to be the only one selling, $70 billion worth of stuff, of arsenals. I think now where our profit margins are going to be made on a lot of communication stuff and a lot of the propulsion. I think propulsion is going to be a huge industry. Composite metals is going to be a huge industry. And that's going to be part of the defense industry. And so in order for I've got a fly around here. I hope it's a fly. So I think I'll leave it at that, but I will definitely be responsive to your question on another one when I have some of my friends from India, and I'm going to have some of the guys from the DRDO, and I'm waiting for the Ministry of Defense to give me the guy that, and he'll nudge me when I talk too much. He'll nudge me, so I'm really looking forward to that one.
Generator 16 just asked if you could explain the quantum bit of what you just were talking about. I have a feeling you won't.
That would be a whole different conversation. So I'm actually going to look at some of these questions also, because Generator 16, like Rosanna Dana used to say, you ask a lot of questions, man. For a guy, you ask a lot of questions for a guy from New Jersey. So I say, you and George Carlin, Amazon won the COVID thing. Yeah, well, all the megacorps did. It's not just Amazon. It's just that Amazon is the one that you're touching the most frequently, and they're just the most visible. But it's also been true with Facebook, which just hit a new high today. And hopefully everybody on Twitter saw me discussing that over the last few months, because that was expected, right? Tesla, is hitting new highs, and that was expected also. Tesla won the cartel wars, right? We now know that the rest of the auto industry is dead. It's dead. It's gone. Don't be nostalgic for it. It doesn't exist anymore. It's a relic. Now, that might sound absurd, but we're taking a look at the defragmentation of the United States and the Western powers. And just as in China, you're taking a look at a defragmentation. So a lot of us grew up in a period where these megacorps were spinning off and doing divestments, where they would go through kind of an oscillating universe, right? They, in the 80s, they were all using junk debt to buy up waste management businesses and they had a lot of divergent businesses under kind of their umbrella. And then in the 90s, we saw them kind of divesting of that as the appetites on Wall Street changed, the investor appetites changed. And now what we're seeing is we're seeing a defragmentation. And part of that is that we're seeing a lot of these megacorps and a lot of our political and oligarch elites having resolved, at least for the time being, having resolved the impermanence of power. So they've done a good job of resolving the impermanence of power, which is something that has plagued these people for thousands of years.
I have my own little question here about that. I just had Brian Romley on here, and one of the major themes that he gave a 3-hour talk where I said very little, and I was more than happy to just let him roll on, sort of like I've just been more than happy to let you do your thing. But he talked about how we really don't see a lot of innovation, almost none. We see iteration, we see these minuscule, and I guess in regards to what you just said, where they've sort of solved the impermanence of power thing, I wonder how much of that would be upset if we saw some actual innovation in the way technology impacted our lives.
So it's interesting. I think on YouTube there's a video that Gary Kasparov did with Peter Thiel. It's really interesting, and it's talking about innovation and how we really haven't seen a lot of progress. And it's a conversation I've had with a lot of people when they want to argue with me about healthcare, because I'm an expert there and I can really argue with people there, and they're going to lose most likely unless they come prepared, right? So a lot of them will talk about, why America doesn't have the life expectancy of this country or that country, and they're really kind of mean prepared. They've got that index card, they've got that little postcard thing filed away that's really not helpful to me, because I don't rely on those postcards. So in many ways, Peter Thiel was correct. And it was really interesting when him and Gary Kasparov said that, because there really haven't been a lot of advancements in medicine and technology. I mean, certainly we saw the Da Vinci from ISRG, which is, really incredible. So we've seen a lot of non-invasive type of machinery coming out in the medical. But we really haven't seen a lot of innovation. There hasn't been this kind of prolonging of people's life that we are expected. We are promised hoverboards. But now things are changing. I can tell you that now things are changing. And that's part of why you're seeing also this transformation. So a lot of the low-hanging fruit problems have been solved. Just as reality, a lot of low-hanging fruit problems have been solved. So now where the lower yielding, low hanging fruit problems are all getting moved downstream to developing countries, to India, which I think will be the big beneficiary of this, to Africa, to Nigeria. And I was just discussing this today and last week as part of the investor thing. So a lot of that innovation now is being pushed downstream because it's a much better yield there. Talent is cheaper there. Labor is cheaper overseas. There's a better yield. Space Force is a lot of innovation, right? These are highly complex problems. We've got to solve a lot of thrust. We've got to solve how to keep people in a cislunar orbit. I think I just lost. I don't know where he went, where Chance went, but I guess everyone's got me. So ask me some questions. But I think Space Force is all about big team, high hanging fruit, highly complex problem solving, and I think it's going to create millions of jobs and just keeping people in the cislunar orbit, figuring out how to beam energy down from the sun, from the cislunar orbit down to Earth. There's going to be millions of jobs, even in the hospitality industry within space and on the moon is going to be millions of jobs. And these are very complex problems. These are not simple problems. We're not talking about Neil Armstrong. We're not talking about walking around in space and some kind of cool type of stuff. We're talking about people actually living there their entire lives in space. So you're talking about how to grow foods there. And just that in itself is something that we can't solve right now. We're not producing America. And if you take a look at all the reports from the White House and from other academic studies, America is not producing the graduate students and the PhD and the academic papers from agricultural, mining, and mineral with those degrees. Instead, we're producing a lot of gender studies degrees and marketing degrees, and we've got to really change that because those are the jobs that are going to be in high demand in space. We even need welders in space. And one of the things that's happened over the last 20 years is there hasn't been a lot of knowledge transfer in a lot of those highly skilled industries. So welders were all told in the 90s and the 2000s that there was no reason for them to train their kids how to weld, how to transfer that onto the next generation. So they didn't bother. And now all of a sudden there's a huge demand for it. And if you take a look at all the Space Force spin-outs that are occurring now, and I look at their help wanteds because I'm very curious about who they're hiring for. Welding is a big part of it, man. You got to launch some massive ships. This is no joke. Massive. And it's not like you can piecemeal it out, build a little bit in China, build a little bit in India. You're talking about essentially the shipbuilding industry that was in Newark in the 20s and in the very early 1900s is now taking on a new form. And it's going to be, instead of shipbuilding seafaring vehicles, it's now going to be space. So I see you laughing at something. So clearly I'm missing something really entertaining, and I want to make sure I'm a part of that.
I'm just laughing at Bob.
Oh, really?
Bob loves welding.
Oh, does he really? Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Good. Yeah.
So Enrico Palcio, he asked, what are some first generation commercial applications for Space Force? And I guess I want to add a little bit of dimension to that question. And I guess I wonder if you see sort of like what is the ladder and what is the timeline?
The timeline is really up until around 2060, 2080.
Okay.
And there's a lot of reports, and I think I did them as a thread on Twitter once, but there's a lot of reports that people should really read about what the future is going to look like in 2030, 2060, and 2100. And I'm telling you, they're really correct. So we have different scenarios, and some of the scenarios are, and I forget how they classified them, but some of the scenarios are in one iteration of 2030 and 2060, we're going to be on an even keel with China, and one we're superior and one they're superior, because those make a whole big difference in terms of the threats, because there's going to be wars, or in terms of the presence of threats, in terms of the laws that are going to be, in terms of the passageways, right? There's going to be routes. You're going to have routes. In terms of space debris, just a whole bunch of different things. In terms of there's just going to be a whole bunch of things. So there's different iterations of these future scenarios. But one thing that's all agreed on is that it's here. So I think Lloyd's of London, my friends just launched the Cartosat 3 in India. And I think at that time, one of the spin-outs from that project went into the private launch industry in India. And I think Lloyd's, they got the first policy from Lloyd's, and Lloyd's predicted that would be a $1 trillion industry, just space launch itself. Just space launch itself. And remember something, that right now America is leasing capacity for launch from Russia. I mean, that's why if you're not watching SpaceX, these launches, you're making a mistake. You should be taking your kids to these things. It's incredible. It's just that we haven't seen them in 20 years because it's all hidden in Russia. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's just amazing. And the size of the vehicles are so much smaller, and the thrust is just so much more impressive. It's just really incredible type of stuff. So there's a lot that's going on with propulsion. There's a lot that's going on with composite metals. Just a whole bunch of different things. Data communications is a really big issue. It's not like you're just trying to land one of these vessels in the middle of an ocean someplace and you've got a fudge factor, right? Or on the moon where it doesn't really move around that much. You're talking about there's going to be a lot of people in space. So you're not just trying to connect one space vehicle to another, and you see people floating from one to the other. It's a really interesting time. So I think that you're going to see a lot of startups. I don't think Amazon wants to house 1,000 startups, and I don't think they're going to commit $1 trillion to 1,000 startups. It doesn't make sense because the rate of failure is going to be much too high, right? So why are they going to devote that much bandwidth and that much of their own internal capacity and bureaucracy? And that means also the org chart for something that's going to have such a high failure. So it's easier for them just to let these startups go, maybe give each of them $1 million, have some type of a seat on the board. Whatever happens, happens. But it's not like they're going to get bought out in 10 years. These things, it's an interesting time. So the future looks different.
Wouldn't they just devote the $1 trillion to the 5 winning companies that prove themselves feasible and go with that? Isn't that how that would play out?
Well, so remember, how did Microsoft grow? How did Apple grow? How did even Tesla? Well, Tesla's a bit of an exception, but they all were kind of parasitic in their own way, and they won by attrition because they waited until the ecosystem was already built out, right? And then they just spent the money to catch up, and they stitched everything together, right? I mean, Microsoft, what was it called, the Muse or whatever they called that crappy device that they had. And I was involved in Kazaa, so I even remember the period before Apple, did their music iPod thing. So even with Apple, they all waited until the ecosystem was out there, and then they just repurposed it and brought it into their umbrella. They de-risked it as much as they could. And you're going to see the same thing happen, with Space Force. They're going to let everybody else build out the ecosystem. There's going to be thousands of new startups. And then they'll wait, they'll wait 10 or 20 years and to see who gets the best propulsion out there. And then they'll make that the standard. But why would you want to fight that battle now?
This is kind of just a personal fascination of mine, but what do you suppose the chances are that we as a species become successfully multi-planetary permanent species? Do you think we can actually make it and head for the stars and sort of secure ourselves outside of just a single planet or solar system?
Well, it's an interesting question because I've changed my mind about it recently. Right? And one of my friends is kind of high up in the Chinese Communist Party, and I think everybody knows I'm very anti-Chinese Communist Party. Right? I'm really anti them, but they're a friend of mine, and they're an ultra-nationalist, and I'm an ultra-nationalist, and they're very high up in one of the tech companies over there, and we compare notes. So we enjoy talking to each other and kind of comparing notes because we can speak with each other very frankly. And they can tell me about some of their own concerns within the China operating system and what's really happening, and kind of some of their own the Chinese Communist Party intrusions into some of the businesses there. I can kind of, and they love our space. They love our Space Force. They love SpaceX. Just as a tangential point. But so it was interesting because I had this conversation with somebody with one of my friends when they visited New York, and the thing that we both agreed on is that that humankind really needs a Space Force because we're going to just kill each other. So we also have to be honest that we've built a lot of bombs, and I don't think China and the U.S. are going to be able to coexist peacefully, going into 2030, 2040, 2050, 60. There's just, I think we all got to get to space and let the plebs stay on Earth. Earth will become like a fulfillment center. So the Amazon.
I love that.
Yeah.
Fulfillment Center Earth. I'm gonna write that short story.
Yeah, you should. I see people. Generator 16, man. You're crazy. You're really out there.
Enthusiastic.
Yeah, really. But let me see. I tell my nephews to get their trade skill. Welders are. Look, all of the industrial skills, people, it's interesting. There's a lot of theories out there about what's called bullshit jobs, right? Which is very bureaucratic, paper pushing type of jobs, but it also includes secretaries. It also includes lawyers and venture capitalists. And it's very interesting because I've always looked for proofs of this theory. And it really is really true. The hostility that particularly white collar have against blue collar is rather it's nasty, isn't it? It's just really nasty. There's just no respect at all. And now look at these kids from Facebook all getting fired, and they spent a lot of money quickly, didn't they? And now they don't have what they thought they had. So it just shows you that there's kind of a recalibration coming on, and I think some of those industrial skills are going to be in high demand. And again, I look at who's hiring. I'm very interested in this because of my old companies, TriNet and Insperity. So I'm always looking at this as kind of a leading indicator. And if you take a look at who the Space Force, and I'm just going to call them the Space Force companies, are hiring, it's a lot of industrial workers. It's really interesting. And if you take a look at the absurdity of some of the Congress proposals, both current regime and going forward, one of the odd things for anybody who knows, about industrial work and particularly defense, which is very highly specialized, is that they want to the rhetoric is that they want to insist on anti-discrimination or whatever they call these things, that they have to fulfill certain types of metrics for the types of people that they hire and all these other type of things. And the absurdity of that, as everybody within that industry knows, is that there's no slack in that workforce. You hire literally whoever you can. So, I wouldn't say there's any discrimination there. You literally hire whoever you can in some of these things. There's so few people that are qualified to go into a cockpit, and I'm experiencing this in India right now, so I can tell you there's definitely a shortage out there.
Okay, so I have one point to add to what you just said, and then I think I want to take one more question and then wrap it up. I'm about to turn into a pumpkin here, and the point I just want to add is I work in the trades. I've worked in the trades most of my life, trades and kitchens and things. I like being active during my days. You can't. A lot of the vehicle shops I've worked with, a lot of the different trades I've worked with, they cannot hire enough people to do the work that people want to contract them to do. They can't. There's not enough skilled mechanics. There's not enough skilled tradesmen. There's not enough skilled builders to do the jobs that people want them to do. They can't build the world that they're trying to build because there's not enough people who know what the hell they're doing to be able to do it. And so this idea that these blue collar guys, are something less than the white collar world. I think the white collar world forgets that they don't have the world that they live in without the people who build it for them. And right now, because of all this emphasis on tech jobs or financial sector jobs or managerial jobs, a lot of the guys who used to build the buildings that they could manage from, or the bank vaults, or those guys don't exist anymore because of this sort of basket of deplorables mentality, or however you want to look at it. It's just a convenient term. I'm not trying to necessarily politicize it overly, but there's not enough guys out there to do the jobs anymore. And it's problematic. And people are starting to really be concerned on the ground level about, how am I going to keep my shop running if I can't hire enough mechanics to do the jobs that I need to be done? I can't do it all myself. I'm 55 years old, 60 years old. I bought this building and I started this shop with my life savings. And now I'm going to lose everything unless I can find a guy who knows how to change the brakes. And so that's just sort of my addition to that.
And it's weird. It's weird when you see like these riots, and my only observation about them, because again, I'm trying to really be a disembodied intellect, but I'm looking at it as a system view, and I see that a lot of the businesses, because Antifa can't tear down Amazon, right? Because Amazon is not only their employer, right? They're not only a phalanx for Amazon, but it's also the more anarchistic ones who would probably have a predisposed to attack Amazon if they could. Amazon's got no physical presence, right? Other than a fulfillment center or maybe the Amazon store where you can get your
shitty books.
Exactly. Amazon really has no physical presence, so there's really nothing to attack. So instead, they're attacking these businesses that now have to leave Wisconsin. They have to leave Seattle because the labor force is leaving, right? So it's not even like the businesses have a choice. The labor, the human capital that they need to stay in business is going. So it's just interesting. As you know, you're going to see those cities and states not be able to recover because when people leave, you're just the cost of training the new people and the amount of time it takes, the amount of downtime you're going to have, and then the amount of turnover in those employees that you're going to have, as you know, is exhaustive and extremely expensive.
100%. So I think the final question I want to field with you here before we sort of have some final thoughts here is from Enrico Palcio. He actually asked this twice and I didn't get to it before, but he asked, what techniques do you use to predict so well? And I want to tag a little bit on that and add, and how important in that process is the idea of information forensics. Like you mentioned sort of at the top of the conversation, I wonder how much the sort of the postmortem and the forensics have to do with your ability to predict moving forward.
Yeah, well, so you just have to have a system view of things, right? So, you've got to be a little bit of a futurist, and it's essential that you become a futurist. And, I think everybody is somewhat of a futurist, right? And how they operate on that or what their vision of the future might vary. And sometimes it might be affected by, there might be other considerations in that outlook. But you've got to have kind of an operating theory of things, right? So, one of my interesting theories, and it was interesting that, I was against the war in Iraq, right? And so two things are interesting. Number one is that the Me Too protest, in terms of participation, looked a lot like the Iraq protest. And you're too young to remember this, right? But
I remember it fully, big time.
Yeah, but you were kind of a kid, so you weren't really part of that whole type of media sensory bombardment. And what people are going through now, we went through then, except it wasn't as severe. Back then we could retreat, right? Now you can't retreat. Now they foreclosed any opportunity for us to retreat. So, but in terms of the kind of visuals and in terms of the volume and amplitude, the Me Too protest and the pink hats or whatever they call themselves looked a lot like the anti-Iraq war protest, except obviously, their difference because the Me Too was a political get out the vote, and it was meant to be kind of a phalanx to bring in a lot of lost white voters and a lot of things that they had lost to the Trump campaign to bring them back in, and there was a lot of other considerations that they were doing. But essentially, what they were also doing is displacing political structures and political apparatus. There was a lot of things going on where you said kind of opportunistically, they seized that moment because they could just distract everybody here and attack on the left flank, right? So they were feigning on the right flank and attacking on the left flank. So listen, they were doing the Muhammad Ali. They were going really far down and then coming up with the uppercut. No, Mike Tyson they were doing. So but visually they looked a lot alike. So now let's go back to I always wondered as a kid, right? Or not really as a kid, but I guess going into the Iraq War and even before the Iraq War, what would happen if a president came in who tried to change all this? I always wonder. I'm like, what would they do? How are they going to be able to stop a president who wanted to change all this, who wanted to stop all the wars? What would they employ to be able to stop all this? And it's just really interesting. So again, this is actually part of my log, is that when And I'm not expressing any opinions about Trump. I'm just saying we've been in Iraq for 15 or 17, 18 years now. And now all of a sudden, everybody's like, we've got to stay in Iraq. And it's actually very interesting. And this was all of 2018 and into 2019. And again, I can give you the whole chronology, man. I can give you a sequence that'll just blow your mind. But I remember in 1992, I was working on Wall Street and I was hearing about Iraq then, and I was hearing about the Kurds back then. And apparently the Kurds are still in trouble, and it's 30 years later because, I was on Wall Street 30 years ago, and still the same Kurds, right? It's amazing. So I was wondering, how is this ever going to, what happens if we try and change this? So I try and, I'm a futurist, and I just want to make sure that I'm on the right side of whatever the future is. I just want to make sure that I'm on the right side of those tracks. And that's part of the whole, financial series we've been doing on Wednesdays is, whatever the future happens, I don't really care about Trump or Biden or any of this or that. I'll let other people exhaust themselves emotionally with those battles, right? Those are my battles. My battle is whatever, the future is, I want to be on the right side of that trade, right? You can either be the person who shorted Tesla at $400, or you can be the person who bought Tesla at $400, right? And let the fates decide which one, where do you want to be? So I hope that everybody will, heed whatever advice I can offer, which is let oligarchs fight oligarch battles, and, don't get yourself emotionally invested. Because I think one thing I've really enjoyed is not being invested in this thing and emotionally within, these oligarch wars, because it's never going to end. So I can't even do my log now. I can't release my log, whatever I've written of it so far, because people don't have the real estate. They don't have any vacant real estate to offer me that I can kind of show them a brochure of my log. Their real estate is completely overdeveloped with housing projects, so it's not good.
Well, look, man, this has been a very interesting conversation on my part, and we've had a bunch of people asking questions and talking and things, and I just really appreciate you coming on here to take the time to talk with me. I know your time's important. It's valuable. It's valuable. My time's valuable too to me.
Yeah, I know it is. And you got a beautiful family, and you got your new house, and I see you're in the basement, right? You told me you were going to work on the basement a little bit.
Yeah, I'm in the basement, and there's a picture that my wife and I painted together probably 10 years ago, hanging up down here. This is my podcast room / my kids' hangout room, so we can get them out of the upstairs and have a little grown-up time.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
And I want to say thank you to everybody who participated too, the comments, the watchers. I know your time is valuable, and I appreciate you spending it with us.
Yeah,
and
thank you so much. Thank you.
So why don't you, Adam, tell them a little bit about where they can find you, your website, your Twitter. Come on, man. It's the end of the.
No.
Well,
look,
he's on Twitter. He's got a website. You can find him.
No, yeah,
Adam's
exactly.
Travel.
I mean,
yeah.
Look, I mean, I'm not trying to sell anything to anybody, right? So I'm just happy that you gave me the opportunity to ramble. So I'll watch this. I'll watch this later tonight. So I want to know if I rambled coherently or incoherently. But thank you for giving me this opportunity, nevertheless, to talk so exhaustively, and particularly about my log. And hopefully, I did a fairly good job of trying to describe my own interest in it.
Well, hey, from my end, I'm honored that you came to talk about it here and that you took the time to spend with me. And you can consider yourself invited back anytime you have something that you want to talk about, and I'll be happy to bring you back on. And you pushed me to develop this live capacity, and now I think I'm going to continue to run with it. It's easy to download it later and everything. So it's people like you out there who kind of challenge people like me to step up a level or two on occasion, and I'm grateful for that. So thanks for taking the time and for the push and for
and I like it. It's fun because I think that, we've all lost so much human interaction in our lives. Like we all miss kind of just hanging out with a buddy and just, I don't drink alcohol, but just getting coffee is my regular thing, my regular spot, and just having those dinners that we all used to love with new friends and everything. And we all miss that intimacy. So I think one of the things I've enjoyed about these, the live periscopes is that, you can regain a little bit of that lost intimacy. Right. And you can kind of feel it. And I like that. So I cherish that. And, I've enjoyed all of them. And thank you again for being such a welcoming host. And hopefully I was a good guest.
You're exactly the guest I was hoping you'd be. I
Yeah.
like you, man. You're a good dude, and it was an
Yeah.
interesting conversation. So, is there any sort of parting shot you want to leave the folks with before we wrap this up?
No, everyone's been so thoughtful. So thank you again, everybody, for spending this time with me.
Well, I want to echo Adam's sentiments there. Just thank you very much for tuning in and taking the time. And I hope that you took something from this and have a good evening, the rest of you, or a morning, or wherever you're watching from. And I look forward to having you participate in the future. And with that, I've been Chance Lunceford. He's been Adam Townsend.
That's great.
This has all been Allegedly. And we're out of here. See you, man.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.